Be loud.
Okay, when you walk up to your bus, you're going to look underneath, make sure you're not leaking any fluids. Be antifreeze, oil, transmission, power steering. You're going to start at the top of your bus. You've got 3 clearance lights on the front. They'll be amber in color. You're looking to make sure they're not cracked or broken or retaining any moisture. You're going to look at reflective tape with your school bus reflective tape. Make sure it's not damaged or faded. You're going to look at both 8-way lights. Make sure there's no cracks. They're not broken or not retaining moisture. You're going to come down and look at your windshield. You're going to make sure that it's clean, doesn't have any cracks. You'll come down to your windshield wipers. You're checking to make sure there's no dry rot on the blades and they're not torn at either end. And they're securely mounted to the bus. You're going to check your cross view mirrors. Make sure they're securely mounted to the bus. They're clean, they're not cracked or broken. Check your mirrors on the side. Make sure they're securely mounted. If the glass is not cracked or broken. You're going to look at your headlights. Make sure they're not retaining moisture and they're not cracked or broken. You'll make sure your crossing gate is securely attached. And then you can also check your turn signals to make sure they're not retaining water and not cracked or broken. Then we're going to open the hood.
Okay.
We'll start up here at the center of the motor. We're going to look at our fan. We'll make sure it's securely mounted. We're not missing any blades. We'll come right down here and look at our water pump. We'll make sure it's not leaking. It's belt driven. You're going to look at our belts. Should have between 1/2 and 3/4 of an inch play in them. You're looking to make sure they're not frayed or dry rotted. And this is a serpentine belt. We'll go over to our dipsticks. It's the oil, transmission. We're going to come down here to our power steering reservoir. Make sure it's securely mounted. Make sure the hose is not dry rotted or leaking. Make sure that the tank itself is not leaking. Okay. We'll come in here to our air compressor. It's right down in here. It's gear driven. You make sure it's securely mounted and it's not leaking. Right on the front of that, you got your power steering pump. Make sure it's securely mounted and it's not leaking. Come out, we'll check our steering column. Make sure the joints are tight. Our steering box. Make sure it's securely mounted, it's not leaking. At your pitman arm, you make sure that it is securely mounted to the box, that the castle nut's on and the pin's in place. Your drag link, make sure that it is securely mounted to the knuckle. The castle nut is on and the pin is in place. Right behind that, you have a tie rod end, making sure that the nut is on and that the pin is in place. That's connected to the center link. It goes all the way over to the other tie rod end. We're going to check our springs. We're checking the spring hangers right here to make sure they're securely mounted, the bolts aren't missing. There's not any cracked or broken leaves, no leaves are missing, and that the U-bolts are both in place and they're not broken, and that the nuts are still on them. We check our shock absorber, make sure it's securely mounted and that it is not leaking. Okay, we're going to come in here to our brakes. We're going to check our brake chamber, make sure that it's not damaged or leaking. You have a slack adjuster. You're going to make sure that it's mounted no more than 90 degrees. And with these tires are chalked and the brake released on the inside, this arm should have no more than 1 inch travel and it should not be bent, it should run straight. Okay, from here we'll go into our brake linings. You need at least 1/4 of an inch of brake lining. You're going to look at the drum. You need to make sure that the drum is not cracked or broken and is not excessively grooved. You're going to check the inside of your wheel. You're going to make sure there's no cracks or welds in it. You'll come over to the inside of your tire, make sure it's not dry rotted, that there's no bulges in it. Come over to the top, make sure it's evenly worn. You need at least 4/32 of tread depth. Come over to the outside. Same thing, you're going to look to make sure there's no bulges in it, it's not dry rotted or have been excessively rubbed. You're going going to check your lug nuts. You're looking for rust trails behind these lug nuts. Make sure they're all present, none missing. You're going to check your valve stem, make sure the cap is on it, and you're going to just make sure that the tire is properly inflated. We'll check your hub oil seal. You're looking for leaks around here. Make sure all the bolts are on it, and make sure the cap's in place. Okay, we're going to check our alternator. Make sure it's securely mounted. It's belt driven. Like I said, the belt should have no more than 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch play. You'll come down, you'll check your washer fluid reservoir, make sure it's securely mounted and not leaking. Make sure it has adequate amount of fluid. Check your coolant reservoir. You're going to make sure that it has an adequate amount of coolant. You'll check the lines coming off of the hoses, make sure they're not leaking or dry rotted. Again, on this side, you'll check your brake chambers, your slack adjusters. You can get a better look on this side at the airline. You want to make sure that it's not leaking, it's not dry rotted, and it's securely mounted at both ends. Okay. Okay, we're going to check our alternator. Make sure it's securely mounted. It's belt driven. Like I said, the belt should have no more than 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch play. You'll come down, you'll check your washer fluid reservoir, make sure it's securely mounted and not leaking. Make sure it has adequate amount of fluid. Check your coolant reservoir. You're going to make sure that it has an adequate amount of coolant. You'll check the lines coming off of the hoses, make sure they're not leaking or dry rotted. Again, on this side, you'll check your brake chambers, your slack adjusters. You can get a better look on this side at the airline. You want to make sure that it's not leaking, it's not dry rotted, and it's securely mounted at both ends. Okay. Right back in here, you're going to check your exhaust, where it's coming out of the motor. You're looking for rust, or just where it's just, or a leak, which would be a rust trail. Make sure it has no holes in it. Okay. Okay, we're going to check the cap on our def tank. Make sure it's on. Make sure it's tight. Make sure the door's latched. We're going to check our step. Make sure it operates properly and securely mounted to the bus. We're going to check our doors. Make sure they're still securely mounted. They open freely. At this point, we can check our floor coverings on our step well. Make sure they're all secured. No floor coverings coming up. Make sure our handrails are tight. We'll check our lens cover to make sure it's not cracked or broken. Check our turn signal. Make sure it's not cracked or broken. We'll make sure that it's not retaining any moisture. We just step back and take an overall look at the bus. Make sure there's not any damage on it, the windows aren't broken. And we'll check our clip lights, our clearance lights on front. They're to be yellow on the front or amber. They're not cracked or broken, retaining moisture, and they're present. They haven't been knocked off. We'll go down, we'll check our reflective tape to make sure it's not faded or torn. We'll make sure our reflectors are still on. It should be amber in the middle and red on the rear. On the underside of the bus, we're going to check our drive shaft. We'll make sure that the joints, the U-joints are securely fastened, that the hangers for the drive shaft are in place, the safety hangers. We'll make sure the U-joints are properly greased. We'll check our exhaust. We're also looking at the joints of the exhaust to make sure there's no rust trails coming from them. They're securely mounted. The hangers for the exhaust are securely mounted. We'll check our cross member. We'll make sure that it's not cracked or broken or otherwise just bent, just damaged. We'll check our brake chambers on the rear, same as we did on the front. Make sure they're not damaged or leaking. We'll check the slack adjuster, same as we did on the front. It should be mounted no more than 90 degrees with the brakes released. It should have no more than 1 inch travel on the push rod. The push rod should run straight. We'll check our springs, our spring hangers. Make sure they're securely mounted. Make sure all the bolts are present. Make sure there's no shifted springs. Make sure they're not cracked or broken. We'll check our brakes as we did on the front. You need at least a 1/4 inch pad on the rear. You'll check your drum, make sure it's not excessively grooved or cracked. You'll check your wheels, same as we did on the front, looking for cracks and welds. You'll check your dual tires in between to make sure there's nothing trapped in between the duals.
Okay.
Check our rear tires, same as we did the front. We're looking for dry rot, any bulging in the tire. You need at least 2 30-seconds of tread depth on the rear. You're going to check your wheel to make sure it's not been welded or it's cracked anywhere. You'll check your lug nuts, make sure they're all there. You have no rust trails coming down from behind them. You check your axle seal, make sure it's not leaking. Make sure all the bolts are present. You also, when you're looking at your brakes, more than just the pad too, you want to make sure that it's dry in there. You don't have any oil, which indicate a wheel seal leaking. Okay. We're going to check our mud flaps, make sure they're not torn and they're securely mounted. Also on the rear of the bus, on the underside, we're going to check our airbags, make sure that they're securely mounted, make sure they're not dry rotted or leaking. Then we'll check our torque arm, make sure it is tucked way up underneath there, above them airbags. You'll make sure that it is not broken or bent. We're going to check our fuel tank, make sure our cap is on, make sure the door is secured, make sure the tank is not leaking. Come to the rear of the bus, we're going to check our exhaust at the rear. Make sure our deflector's still there and it's securely mounted and not rusted. Okay, we're going to start at the top with our clearance lights. They should be red in color on the rear. Make sure they're not cracked or broken or retaining moisture. You check your school bus reflecting tape. Make sure that it's not faded or torn. You'll check your glass to make sure it's clean, not broken, no cracks in it. You'll check your door handle. Make sure that it operates from the outside. You want to check your 8-way system. Make sure that your 8 ways are not cracked or broken or retaining moisture. That'll be the red and the ambers. You'll check your rear lights here. Be a turn signal, brake light, reverse light, and that is a brake and tail light. You make sure that all the lenses are not cracked or broken, or none of these are retaining moisture. You also check your reflectors on the rear. They'll be red on the rear. They're not cracked or broken or missing. You're going to check your stop sign. Make sure it's securely mounted. You make sure that the wiring is not broken or frayed. You're going to check your battery box. You're going to make sure your tray is secure, your battery cables are not corroded, and your batteries are not leaking, and they're properly tied down. Check the handle on this storage box and make sure that it is latched. Okay, we're going to do the brake test. I'm going to turn the power on. I got an ABS light comes on, and it should go out, and it did. We're setting at 100 pounds of pressure, which is enough to start the brake test. So I'm going to step on the service brake. I'm going to release. Well, first I'm going to chalk my tires if we're not setting on level ground. I'm going to step on the service brake, release the spring brake, and I'm going to fan the air off until we get down to 60 pounds. I should get an alarm and a warning light. And there it is. Okay, between 20 and 40 pounds, my spring brake should pop out and set the brakes in the rear. And it did. So now we're going to start the engine. I should build 85 to 100 pounds in 45 seconds. At 60 pounds, my alarm and light should go off. Okay, 60 pounds, the light went off. Reached our 85 to 100 pounds. Now we're going to wait for the air dryer and the spit valve to pop off once we're at capacity. Popped off, the governor's cut out. So at this point we're going to shut it down. I'll open my side window. I should not lose more than 2 pounds per minute just sitting here not doing anything. I've got my window open, so I'm listening for air leaks outside the bus, listening for air leaks at the valve. So after you've set for a minute, you'll apply the service brake. You'll release the brake. You hold that brake down. You should not lose more than 3 pounds per minute just sitting here with the brake applied. Okay, after you've set your minute, you're going to set the brake. You're going to restart the engine. Okay, with the brake set, we're going to put it in gear. We're going to tap the accelerator to make sure that the brake holds, and it does. We're going to release the brake. We're going to move forward and make sure the service brake works, and it did. Now we'll set the brake, and that's the end of the brake test. Okay, we're going to check.
Yep.
We're going to check the inside of the bus, and we'll turn the power on. My brake is set. We're just going to turn the key on. On the way back, we're going to check all of our seats by grabbing and pulling up on them, hitting the backs. Make sure they're all fastened. None of them coming loose. We'll go all the way to the back of the bus. We'll check that the alarm on our door works. It does. Behind the seat here, I have a fire extinguisher. We'll make sure it's fully charged. That the arrow should be in the green, and the tag should be up to date, and should be securely mounted to the floor. On our way back up, we're going to check the side window. Make sure the alarm works on the window. And it does. We're going to check our floor coverings, make sure they're all fastened to the floor properly. We're going to check to make sure the bus is clean, nothing in the aisles, no trip hazards. We're going to check our emergency triangles that are mounted under this seat. Make sure the lid's closed and latched, and if all the triangles are inside. We'll come up here, we'll check our fire extinguisher up front. It's securely mounted, it's fully charged, arrow's in the green, and the tag is up to date. We'll check our first aid kit, our body fluid kit. You can see that they haven't been opened, they still have the tags on them. We will check for a proof of insurance. We'll check for the proof of insurance, spare fuses. Some may not have spare fuses because they have resettable breakers. And we'll also check for our belt cutter.